Welcome to New Wave Teaching Lessons. If you're new here, don't forget to click subscribe. We upload videos every single week. In this series, we'll talk about Algebra 1, specifically Semester 1. Let's get started. So before we begin, guys, I recommend going to the last video up above to get a better understanding of two-step equations before we move into multi-step equations. So make sure you watch that video first. So let's get started with multi-step equations. So first off, I need to understand what they might look like. So when solving multi-step equations, sometimes you will have to distribute before you can combine like terms. So again, sometimes you will have to distribute before you combine like terms. You want to look at those kind of separately. So here's what that might look like. So I have 4 parentheses 5 plus 7x plus 2x equals 15. Okay, so I have a grouping of the 5 and 7x. The 4 is on the outside, and the 2x is kind of hanging by itself, and then the 15 is far away. So I cannot do anything with the 2x. The 2x cannot combine with any like terms. So that gives me the only option of distributing that positive 4. And remember, when we distribute, that means multiplication, and we'll talk about that more in the examples. The next possible thing you might see with multi-step equations is when solving multi-step equations, sometimes you will have to combine like terms before you can distribute. So here's what that might look like. So in this equation, you see the difference from the first one. Now, instead of my parentheses only being around 2 of them, there are around 3 of them. And if I'm looking at the 6, because a lot of students might distribute that 6 first, and it's really important that you do not, because if you can combine like terms first, you must. So that's what we did with the 7x and the 3x. Those are like terms because they both have an x. So I need to put them together, which will make 10x, and then I can go ahead and distribute like I did in the top one. Okay, before we get started with these notes, remember there are downloadable PDFs that you can use to follow along with our notes. We have 4 examples and 4 U-tries and all the answers for you. Those are free in the description box below. Just go ahead and click the link and download them, and you can use them while you're watching this video. So going into the goal of this particular video, multi-step equation with variables on one side. That is my goal. So looking at a possible example. So this would be example number 1 in your notes. So -3 parentheses x minus 1 parentheses plus 7x equals 27. Okay, so looking at this, we talked about in the toolbox that sometimes you might have to distribute first, and sometimes you might have to combine like terms first. So looking at this, I don't see anywhere that I can combine like terms. Please do not combine the 7x and the x. The reason you cannot combine them is because the parentheses kind of have a barrier, and if there was x's inside the parentheses together, then you can combine them. If there was x's outside the parentheses together, then you combine them, but not one of each. So our only option here would be to distribute that -3. So remember, this is also very important. We have that little tip to the side. You have to distribute the outside number to all terms in the parentheses. So when I say terms, I mean like items, like however many numbers or letters there are, you have to distribute to everything. So in our parentheses, I have x and I have also -1. I have 2 terms in the parentheses. So if I have 2 terms, I'm also going to have 2 times that I'm going to be distributing that -3. So it'll be -3x, because -3 times positive x is -3x. And then we have -3 times -1 will give you +3. And then everything else that we have not touched will just come on down. So 7x and 27 will be unchanged. So now from this point, I cannot do any more distributing. So I'm going to look at the combining of like terms. So again, like terms are those that have the same variable. So right off the bat, I see that -3x and 7x both have an x. So I know that they're alike and I can combine them. So I'm going to go ahead and combine them to get 4x, and then the 3 and the 27 will both come down. So now this looks just like our previous video where we have two-step equations. So a multi-step equation is just more steps of a two-step equation essentially. So now I do need to leave my variable to the last step. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3 to both sides. Again, to keep your notes and your work organized, you're really going to want to start marking stuff off as you get rid of it. So if you're going to get rid of that 3, make sure you put a line through it to know that you no longer need it. And then we have 4x equals 24. I know that the 4 and the x are being multiplied. So I'm going to go ahead and do the inverse operation, which is divide by whatever number that is there, which is 4. I'll cancel those out as well. And I end up with x equals positive 6. Okay, so here is another possible equation you might get. So example 2, we have 4 minus 3x minus 6 equals 28. So if I'm looking at this question, I have to know that there is something in front of that parentheses, always. So remember, if there is no number outside the parentheses, put a 1, then distribute. So I know that there is always going to be a 1 outside that parentheses if there is no other number. And in this situation, we have a negative 1. That looks like a subtraction sign, but subtraction signs and negatives are one and the same. So that is a negative 1 that I'm going to be distributing to both the 3x and the negative 6. So make sure you distribute to all of the items inside the parentheses. So when I do that, I get 4 minus or negative 4 minus 3x plus 6 equals 28. So now, again, in this note, we're looking at combining like terms. We're looking at distributive property. So that's going to be a common thing that I keep bringing up. So like terms. I don't see any other numbers with x's, but I do see other numbers that don't have x's. So for instance, I have 4 and positive 6. Those are like terms because they don't have an x or another variable. So I can combine those. So we have negative 3x plus 10 equals 28, and we have a regular two-step equation now. Reminder, you do have to leave the variable to the last step. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that negative 3 alone and subtract the 10 to both sides instead. Keep your work organized by crossing out those 10s. And we have negative 3x equals 18. I'm now going to finally get the x by itself and divide both sides by 3. Be careful here. You want to make sure you divide by whatever number is there. So if there's a negative attached to that number, which in this case there is, you need to divide by negative 3 to both sides. Please do not forget that negative, because if you don't take it with you, then the x is truly not by itself. So again, we're going to cross those out. And our answer is going to be x equals negative 6. Okay, our third example looks a little bit different. We have some negatives, we have some spaces going on. So let's look at that space. Just like the last question, if there is no number there, you want to put a 1 in there for it, just as a placeholder to know, okay, there's a negative 1 that I'm going to need to distribute. So when I go ahead and do that, I'm going to get negative 1 going to the x and the negative 1 inside the parentheses. So we get 6, negative 1x plus 1 plus 5x equals 15. So in this situation, we have a lot going on the left side. We have multiple like terms. So I see 2 numbers that have x's, and then I see 2 numbers that don't have x's. So looking at that, remember, like terms are ones that have the same variables, just like I said. So we have negative 1x and 5x will be one set of our like terms. And then we have positive 6 and positive 1 will be our other set of like terms. Notice the colors of the circles that I put over them. Those are going to go together. So my grays are going to go together and my pinks are going to go together. So when I combine those, I get 5x minus 1x will give me 4x. And then of course 6 plus 1 will give me 7. And don't forget to drop that 15. So now we have a regular two-step equation. I'm going to subtract 7 to both sides. Cross out that 7 and get 4x equals 8. I know that 4 and x are being held together by multiplication, so I need to divide as my inverse operation by 4. Go ahead and cross out for organization and x equals positive 2. Okay, example number 4 in our last example is much different from the first 3 examples. So going back to our toolbox, which you can do in this video, I'm looking at the second portion because there's nothing that I can do as far as distributive property first because I do have some like terms inside the parentheses. So again, if you can combine anything in the parentheses, that's what you have to do first. So there's our tip. Remember, if you can combine like terms in the parentheses, you must, and then distribute. So looking at my like terms, I have negative 4x and negative 2x. A negative and a negative, when you're adding, is going to give you another negative. So I'll end up with 2 and then negative 6x plus 6 on the inside equals 48. So now that my like terms are taken care of on the inside of the parentheses, now I can go ahead and distribute that positive 2 to both the negative 6x and the positive 6. So we end up with negative 12x plus 12 equals 48. A regular two-step equation again, and I'm going to go ahead and subtract 12 to both sides. Cross that out. Then we have negative 12x equals 36. Again, reminder, you must divide by whatever number you see. So don't just divide by 12. Since there's a negative 12, we're going to have to divide by negative 12. And that's going to give us an answer of negative 3. Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. Make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit the notification bell to never miss a video. Have a good one.